coronavirus.
COVID-19. They're just following.
2020 has been the year of challenges to most people in the world. From the COVID-19 pandemic, where so many people lost their lives and jobs, we have seen economies fall, protests erupt in many countries, and the killings of Africans or black people who don't identify themselves as Africans in many different countries. In some countries, the color of your skin is the line between life and death. Is the reason for you to have a job or not? Is the reason for you to speak out or not? For you to have rights or not? Africans, black people, have had to put more effort than any other race in the world for them to have anything worth it. This was either outside the African continent or inside the continent, and it became more challenging outside the continent. Here's an African perspective on racism.
Africa was the Tsar continent of slave trade. The full story of Africa and its people.
The story of racism in Africa is of two parts. One from the external influence from the Europeans and other nations in the world, and another from inside the African continent. This was between either tribes of one country or between one nation with another nation. From the early years of the 15th century, different explorers from Europe ventured to discover the African continent. Explorers like Henry the Navigator, Bartholomew Diaz, and Vasco da Gama. By the time these explorers reached Africa, African people were scattered all over the continent. Most people were situated in areas that were easy to cultivate and raise their families and livestock. To the European explorers, Africa was a new adventure to them. They knew so little about the continent and its people. And to the things that they never truly understood, they assumed about it. This is where the assumption of Africa being a dark continent filled with savages came from. A good example is when Vasco da Gama reached the east coast of Africa in 1498. He found tall stone cities where people had been using compasses technology, maps and charts, just like the Europeans, but it was never recognized by the next explorers who came. They never understood or wanted to understand Africans. Moving forward to the years close to colonialism, European missionaries came with an image of holiness and the theory of spreading Christianity, without knowing that they were agents of colonial powers. They forced religion to most Africans and manipulated Africans to think that all their previous beliefs were false. They created ranks in the society by appointing new local leaders who would comply with their beliefs. Having the support of local leaders, it was easy for them to establish cities and towns suited for them. These cities and towns were named after Europeans, and also all the facilities inside were meant for Europeans, and no blacks were allowed in the cities. A good example is the city called Orania, established in 1991 in South Africa and still currently exists. The early missionaries also helped in facilitating the move and capture of Africans as slaves to the American continent and Europe. After hundreds of years in slavery, the Africans in the Americas and Europe were completely washed out of their culture and true story of where they're from, leaving most of them confused, not being accepted in the country they were born in. Back in Africa, colonialism had just ended and most African nations just started making choices of their own. Africa was extremely diverse. It had not only African race, but all sorts of races, from Arabs, whites, Asians, and mixed race. Africa being diverse seemed all good from the top, but deep down it brought classification in the society. People were grouped in specific boxes according to their ethnicity or how they looked. The lighter your skin was, the more opportunities in life you had. Most people associated their skin color with wealth, since most people still had the ideology left by the colonial rule. Ethnicities like Indians and Arab, since their ancestors were more involved in trade in the early years, most of the businesses were owned and controlled by them, and the dark-skinned Africans were the last consumers of their products. Until today, there are several groups of Africans who have the ideology that the lighter your skin is, the more success you'll have in life, and the more attractive you are. These groups wouldn't marry outside their ethnicity because they will destroy the bloodline that has been there since their ancestors. A good example is Africans with Arab and Indian ethnicity from the north of Africa, Eastern Africa, and South Africa, in countries like Libya, Tunisia, Mauritania, the coast of Kenya, the coast of Tanzania, and South Africa. Most people wouldn't think of racism inside the continent of Africa, but it's covered with what it seems to be culture or heritage, but it's pure racism. This video isn't made to point out anyone, but as an educational tool. Thank you very much for watching. See you next week.